An empath's tragedy is this: they feel others completely, yet fear accepting themselves. Inspired by Carl Jung, there comes a time in the life of every sensitive soul, every finely tuned psyche, when the weight of feeling too deeply becomes nearly unbearable. Yet often this unbearable weight isn't even theirs to begin with. You, the one who has entered a room and felt a sorrow no one mentioned. You who brought home the anxiety of strangers, carrying it like your own burden. You are not imagining things. You are not fragile. And you are certainly not cursed. What you are is something far more uncommon. You are empathic. But tonight I tell you this with deep solemnity: your gift is in real danger of being consumed. When the inner light of a soul burns too intensely, when it arises not from a mask, but from a deeper flame within, the shadows are drawn in, not just to observe, but to devour. The unconscious mind, in its immense hunger for completeness, is naturally drawn toward its opposite. And so you, as a carrier of inner light, inevitably attract those who have lost theirs. But this is not just about interpersonal dynamics or emotional compatibility. No, this is a kind of spiritual chemistry, one that is profoundly dangerous. Empaths are not made by choosing to be so. They are formed through survival. Their deep perception was not gifted freely. It was developed often, early on. Perhaps through walking on eggshells around a volatile parent. Perhaps by absorbing the chaos of a world too intense to face head-on. So the empath's body became an instrument of listening. Their soul became absorbent, a sponge. They adapted by tuning into every subtle shift, every small flicker of another's emotional fire. But what began as coping eventually became identity. And identity, in the natural order of things, draws its opposite toward it. For every empath, there is a narcissist waiting to complete the energetic loop. I'm not referring here to narcissism in the everyday sense, not the shallow version tied to vanity or selfishness. No. The narcissist I speak of is not just a personality type. It is an archetype, a symbol, a fragmented mirror of the self. One who, having exiled their own pain, now seeks to feed on the light of another. Where the empath feels everything, the narcissist feels almost nothing. Where the empath offers without end, the narcissist takes without shame. One is submerged in the emotional ocean of others. The other builds high walls to never face their own. They are not drawn together by love nor by fate, but by something deeper, a symbolic pull toward balance. The law of the unconscious demands equilibrium. So the unhealed bringer of light calls in the devourer from the shadow. This is not coincidence. It is a psychic ritual, an ancient reenactment where light and dark attempt to remember they were once united. But be careful, this union is never sacred unless both awaken, and more often than not, only one bears the burden of that awakening. You, the empath, may believe your task is to heal the wounded, to restore broken souls to wholeness, to love the unlovable back into light. But this belief is not compassion, it is possession, not by demons or ghosts, but by an archetype far too vast for any single soul to contain. It is the wounded healer, the one whose agony becomes his path, and also his prison. The real danger is not in your light itself, but in the way you identify with that light. The narcissist feeds off this identification, not with conscious intent, for in their own eyes they are rarely the villain, but at a deep, unconscious level. They crave what they have cut off from themselves. You become the mirror they cannot break, and your empathy becomes the fuel that allows them to avoid their own suffering. Because when they are near you, the emptiness inside them fades, at least temporarily. But like a vampire afraid of its own reflection, they will eventually come to resent what you reveal. And you, dear soul, you will begin to feel like you're slowly dying. Because what fades is not just your physical energy, but your very sense of self. Every time you abandon your truth just to keep the relationship intact, you're offering yet another piece of yourself at the altar of someone else's denial. You'll start to dream of drowning, of running through houses without exits. These aren't random images. They are urgent cries from your unconscious. They're pleading with you to see clearly, to realize that what you've been calling love is actually self-erasure, that what you call loyalty might really be trauma playing itself out again. But do not lose hope. This pain you feel, it is not a punishment. It is a passage. To walk away from these dynamics is not an act of betrayal. It is an act of liberation. And when you reclaim your light, it is no longer something to be consumed by others. It becomes a source of direction, a force to guide you home to yourself. Your light was never meant to save everyone else. It was always meant to illuminate your own path. Empathy that lacks boundaries will ultimately lead to self-destruction. Love, when offered without discernment, becomes codependency. And healing others, if it comes before healing yourself, turns not into transformation, but into spiritual martyrdom. The right path is not about dimming your light, nor is it about hardening your heart to keep people out. It's about deep self-knowing. It's about looking not only into the eyes of others, but into the mirror of your own soul. It means being willing to face your shadow, to take ownership of your projections, to tell the difference between divine guidance and emotional entanglement. Only when the empath becomes aware of their own inner narcissism, that part of them that needs to be needed, that clings to being essential so badly it would rather endure anything than be abandoned, can the cycle finally begin to dissolve. Because, just as the narcissist takes from the unconscious empath, the empath offers themselves up to be taken. This is not sainthood, it is a quiet kind of self-erasure. In front of this dark mirror, you must ask, who benefits when I stay silent? Who gains when I suppress what I know? What part of me believes I must suffer just to be worthy of love? These are sacred questions. They are keys. But they must be turned slowly with care, because the door they open is old, and behind it lies not only your freedom, but also your dormant power. That power you reclaim, it is not meant to be used to fix or rescue others. It exists so you can see clearly without losing yourself in the process. You must understand something vital. The unconscious is not evil, but it is without moral concern. It doesn't care for your comfort, your relationships, or even your survival. It seeks only one thing: completion, wholeness. So when you move through the world, radiating light, unguarded and unaware, you become a beacon. But not every soul that is drawn to you comes in peace. Some do not come to witness your light, they come to absorb it. The unintegrated shadows of others will recognize in you what they cannot locate in themselves. Not love, not genuine connection, but food, nourishment for a hunger they don't even understand. This is the core tragedy of the empath's story, to be born with an exquisite gift for emotional attunement, yet burdened with the illusion that salvation lies in self-sacrifice. It's here inside that illusion that many are lost. The line between meaning and martyrdom becomes almost invisible, and what once felt like a calling starts to turn into compulsion. If you constantly find yourself drained after being around certain people, this is not some defect in your nervous system. It is your soul raising its voice. The body never lies. It always holds the wisdom that the mind works hard to ignore. Empaths often try to explain away this exhaustion. They say, maybe I'm just overreacting. Maybe I'm too sensitive. But this isn't sensitivity, it's submersion. You are drowning in the emotional unconscious of someone else and mistaking it for love. The most dangerous thing an empath can do is to take responsibility for the transformation of someone else. Because the narcissist, or rather the archetype of the devourer, will not change simply because you give more. They change only when the mirror breaks, when the source of supply disappears, when the performance that is the relationship stops earning applause from your attention. They do not change because you love them harder. They only shift if the soul is ready when you leave. But for the empath, this truth is often unbearable. Their inner trauma script says, if I just love enough, I will finally be safe. You didn't learn this pattern during adulthood. You inherited it in childhood. You learned how to calm the storms of grown-ups. You learned to predict the shifting moods of those who controlled your survival. You didn't become attuned because it was noble. You became attuned because it was necessary. What started as a survival tool became an addiction to fixing, to keeping the peace, to being the soothing balm for wounds that were never yours in the first place. But hear me now, the child inside was innocent, yet the adult must wake up. Now, because the narcissist in your life doesn't just mirror your opposite. They reflect something even deeper, the part of you that still believes you have no worth unless you're useful. That belief, that haunting silent idea, is your true prison, and unless you unravel it, you will keep attracting those who are starving. People who smile at your warmth while quietly sipping from your soul. Not because they are evil, but because you left the gates wide open without ever asking yourself, what exactly am I protecting? Who guards the one doing all the guarding? You must now learn a new kind of love, not the love that stretches until it snaps, but the kind that holds form, that knows its own edges. A love that says, I will not abandon myself in order to keep you close. That is the kind of love that heals not only others, but you. And here lies the paradox. Empaths deeply long to be loved for who they really are. But too often they bury that true self in their effort to be accepted. They shapeshift, they soften, they absorb, they adjust, until one day they no longer recognize who they are in the mirror. This is the wound, and it is also the warning. If you do not come back to yourself, others will keep feeding on you, not with hatred, but out of hunger. Because if you refuse to draw the line, life will eventually draw it for you. Through collapse, through fatigue, through the slow crumbling of the illusion that love must always come with pain. The myth of the empath is not just a personal one. It is a collective inheritance. You carry pain that did not begin with you. You dream the dreams of ancestors who were never fully seen, never heard, never held. Your heart has become a temple for grief that has never been spoken aloud. And your role is not to carry that sorrow any further. Your task is to transform it. That transformation begins the moment you say no more. No more abandoning your own needs just to be validated. No more confusing intensity with true intimacy. No more calling trauma bonds soulmates. No more sacrificing your inner peace just to play the role of someone else's peacekeeper. The world doesn't need more healers who are burnt out. What it needs is those who are awake. Healers who are whole, healers who are fierce, healers who have learned how to protect their energy, not by isolating, but through clear discernment. And what is discernment truly? It is the quiet, unwavering courage to name what you feel even before it's convenient to do so. It is the sacred pause before you say yes, when your entire soul is whispering no. It is the act of choosing yourself, not from selfishness, but from spiritual responsibility. Because if your well runs dry, what truth will you have left to give? Let me say this clearly so there is no confusion left in your heart. You are not too much. You never were. But yes, you have given too much to those who were never able to hold it. And that is not your fault. It is your pattern. But here is the truth. When a pattern becomes conscious, it becomes a doorway. That is the beginning of alchemy. That is the moment your empathy stops being your burden and becomes your strength. The danger you face is real not because people are monsters, but because they are wounded. And wounds, they seek healing, even if it means draining the one who carries the light. Especially when that healer has not yet remembered their own worth. But now you do. Your soul cries out for something simple and sacred: balance. And for the empath, balance often begins by learning the sacred language of limits. By understanding that love is not measured by how much suffering you can endure, but by how much truth you're willing to stand in even when it's your own. This is the beginning of individuation, not the path of merging endlessly with others, but the sacred return, the journey back to yourself. Every empath will eventually reach this threshold, and it is a holy one, the threshold where the fear arises. What if I become selfish? But let's be honest, this fear is not the voice of your higher self. It is an old echo, a remnant of past conditioning, the one that told you your needs were too much, that your feelings made others uncomfortable, that your truth would always cost you connection. But I ask you now, how long will you keep paying that price? How many times will you silence your intuition because someone else appears to be hurting? How many nights will you spend trying to resolve emotions that were never yours to carry in the first place? The empath's heart is a compass, but only if you allow it to first point inward. If your sensitivity is used only to attune to the chaos around you, then you become an antenna for pain. You start absorbing suffering as if that's your job, as if that's love. But when you turn that same sensitivity inward, it becomes something else entirely. It becomes vision, a vision into what is real, a vision into the very structure of your soul, a deeper seeing into the subtle energetic movements that gently whisper, "This is yours, and this is not." Do you know what happens when an empath finally wakes up? They stop apologizing. They stop shrinking themselves. They stop over-explaining their boundaries to people who only benefited from their absence. They begin to shine not as flickering lanterns to guide others' darkness, but as fierce, rooted torches that burn with clarity. They no longer beg for a seat at someone else's table. They build an altar of their own, not made of martyrdom, but built upon truth. This is what the world fears most, the empath who remembers their own power. Because once you remember, you're no longer easy to manipulate. You stop being emotionally available to those who drain you under the disguise of connection. You no longer confuse care with chemistry. And instead, you begin to ask a far deeper question. Does this relationship honor the person I am becoming? That question is a blade. It slices through illusion. It becomes the lens through which every connection must pass. And no, this does not mean you become cold or unfeeling. It means you become clear. And clarity is one of love's fiercest and most honest expressions. I must tell you this, not everyone who claims to need your light is meant to receive it. Some will arrive with magnetic stories and wounded charm. Some will weep in your arms while quietly sharpening blades behind your back. Others may genuinely love you, but only the version of you that stays small enough not to disturb their comfort. Your light is sacred, but it is not a donation box. You do not owe your soul to every outstretched hand. Even Christ had discernment. Even saints walked away when their presence was no longer a blessing, but a drain. So if you feel a pull towards someone, pause and ask yourself, is this true resonance, or is it repetition? Is this my intuition speaking, or an old wound hoping to be resolved? Because not every inner pull is divine. Sometimes it's trauma wearing the costume of destiny. Sometimes it's the voice of your inner child whispering, maybe this time they'll choose me. But you must be the one who chooses yourself first. You must become the parent your wounded heart never had. The guardian who gently says, I will never abandon you again, not even for the sake of love. You see, the final warning for empaths is not simply that others might hurt you. It's that your own unhealed craving to be needed, the part of you that ties love to sacrifice, is the most dangerous force of all. When you nourish others with the core of your being, believing that real love must cost your vitality, you begin replaying the ancient tale of self-erasure. And that story never ends in freedom. It always leads to depletion. But something changes the moment you see the pattern. When you hold it in your hands and say, now I understand. That's when you take the pen back. You begin writing a new chapter. A chapter where you're no longer a sponge for the world's emotional weight, but instead a vessel for truth. A life where your light doesn't flicker from exhaustion and overextension, but glows steadily with clear purpose. And that purpose is not to save others from the shadows they refuse to face. It is to embody the truth that wholeness is possible, not by absorbing the pain of others, but by learning how to transform it. Empath, your greatest gift was never your suffering. It is your sight, the rare ability to feel what others overlook, to perceive what lies beneath the surface. But with this gift comes a responsibility to protect it, to guard it, to treat it as sacred. Let your yes be a sacred vow. Let your no be a seal, a boundary that protects your energy field. Let your presence bring blessing, but never become a buffet. You are not here to satisfy every hunger. You are not a remedy. You are not anyone's savior. You are a soul sovereign and seen. And when you finally believe that the world will stop feeding on you and begin to honor you instead, the soul cries out for balance. And for the empath, that balance often begins with learning to speak the language of boundaries. It means realizing that love is not measured by how much pain you can carry, but by how much truth you are willing to hold, especially your own. This is where individuation begins, not through dissolving into others, but by reclaiming what was always yours, yourself. Every empath will one day meet this sacred threshold, The threshold of fear. The voice that whispers, "What if I become selfish?" But that voice isn't your higher self. It's the echo of an old script, one that convinced you long ago that your needs were a burden, that your feelings were too loud, that your truth would cost you love. But now ask yourself, how long will you continue paying that price? How many more times will you betray your own knowing just because someone else looks wounded? How many more nights will you spend trying to fix emotions that were never even yours to begin with? This is Philosoul, where the mirror shatters, and the man you were born to be takes his first step.
Thank you for watching. Walk your path with quiet strength.